Hello, American Prestige listeners. It's Derek, joined as always by my friend and comrade Danny Bessner, and we are very grateful to welcome back to the program Akbar Shahid Ahmed. He is diplomatic correspondent for NOTUS. He covers U.S. foreign policy. He's also the author of the forthcoming Crossing the Red Line, Biden, His Advisors, and Israel's War on Gaza. That's going to be a separate American Prestige event. When that book is available, we will be having Akbar back to talk about it. But right now, we want to talk about what is going on with these people in the Iran war. Uh, Akbar, you wrote a couple of pieces. You've written a couple of pieces recently. One that was Trump is veering toward abandoning international law when he was planning to carry out airstrikes. Now he's not. And the other Iran-focused U.S.-Israel meetings sidelines allies other disagreements. We could talk about that as well. But Akbar, first of all, thank you for coming back on the program. Second of all, what is going on? What are we doing here?
Thank you so much for having me,
Have you
Derek and Danny. Yeah.
we have you we ask you on to try to decipher what is going on in the White House. Are you still trying to do that, or are you just embracing the suck at this point? I guess is my question.
I'm still talking to people in and close to the White House
I
and other
I commend
agencies.
you for your persistence.
One has to, in some ways, right? You end up being the therapist for some of these sources because they are in the crazy themselves all the time. So you are the person who has to remind them, hey, when you tell me we're making progress with the Iranians, you also told me that in May and in June and in April, and you continue to bomb them, then stop, then say you're making progress. So trying to sustain some of those relationships. I will say some of the there was some optimism among folks in the administration who were hopeful of getting on at least some kind of clear pathway, whether it's a strategic or successful or even humane pathway, is not always the top priority, but at least for them, it's do we know what we're doing one day to the next? They felt they were in that place last weekend where Kane and some other military advisors, Cooper too, pushed back on Trump and those major strikes. However, these are also the same military leaders who've enabled Trump's instincts throughout to just demand a full capitulation from Iran. And meanwhile, to your point of what are we doing? Yes, right now we have stopped US strikes on Iran. However, we're seeing a major escalation of the war through the Bab el Mandeb, with the Houthis, the Iran-backed militia in Yemen, kind of being able to turn away more ships there. So Trump's initial problem about stopping shipping in Hormuz is now becoming a double problem with this other strait. And we're seeing the exact same negotiating team we've had throughout: Wunderkind, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff, President Trump's golf buddy and real estate friend. The people who've been trying to negotiate with Iran, importantly, since January 2025, not just since this war, and have, of course, failed to reach a deal that entire time.
I want to follow up on something that you said there, which is do you get do you have I guess any adverse encounters with people when you say things like you told me this same thing in June and in May and in April and in March? Like what's really going on? Like do they get frustrated with you when you mention the fact that they've been spinning the same yarn over and over again?
I my style is more sort of gentle reality check,
Okay, okay.
because
That's
because they,
probably for the best, yeah. I would not
they're
be good at this, yeah.
they're already in a place where, again, they're getting conflicting things all the time, and the tiny egos of the senior men they're dealing with, from Hegseth to Trump, right? This sort of really sensitive sense of self. While it seems like a big projection of ego, it really comes from a place of insecurity, right? Dealing with that, dealing with uncertainty, and dealing with the fact that a lot of them who went in were not, in there to promote the cult of Donald Trump. Some of them certainly were, and for personal enrichment, but there were people who went in for serious ideological reasons, right? Either believing the America First narrative or believing Biden was weak on Iran, we're going to be tough on Iran, we're going to get something from Iran. And so any of those factions too feel they've gone in, put their names on a policy, and will forever be associated with just this real embarrassment of a war.
Who at this point what's the sense you have of where the decision making, I mean, ultimately, I guess it rests with Trump, but we had this same conversation with Joe Biden. Like, who is gatekeeping? Who's, really controlling the decision making process? Um, what is your sense of how that's working with all the personalities in this administration right now?
Let's go through them, a little bit one by one. So Rubio and Vance are sort of the most important ones to look at in that Vance is the most prominent and influential so-called restrainer, right, and so-called opponent of a war with Iran. Of course, he's publicly talked about supporting diplomacy. I would argue tangibly he's done nothing to advance that cause in any meaningful way. And so while he's publicly presenting himself as anti-war, I've never heard of him, for instance, seriously being able to restrain Trump or saying apply pressure in these ways on the Israelis or let up on the Iranians. Hasn't happened. But I raise those two to highlight how if you look at the circle around Trump, they're a little bit all trying to run as fast as they can away from this issue, right? So Rubio and Vance are already very focused on their 2028 rivalry with each other for the bid, and you see this in the leaks to the press that have come out in several stories in the last week. I've been approached by people close to both of them, trying to pitch oppo on each other. So they're already running that primary, which means they're thinking beyond Trump and thinking about their own future. Then you have Susie Wiles, chief of staff, who's threatening congressional Republicans about trying to pass something on the Hill for Trump. She also doesn't want to be dealing with Iran. And then you have these uniformed officers who Trump likes to listen to people in uniform, but the really, really depressing reality is that he's normalized. I mean, in one sense, yes, civilian control of the military is really important. As someone who grew up under military dictators in Pakistan, I deeply feel that. However, he's normalized the sense that if you're a uniformed officer who gives him information he doesn't want, you will be out the door. And so, if Kane and Cooper, chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff and the head of CENTCOM, the U.S. military command dealing with the Middle East, those are the people who can most talk to Trump. They're not going to tell him tough truths. They consistently have avoided doing it. And then you have
And I
the
mean,
chief.
their
Yeah,
screen coming in and going out, right? I mean, it's Kane should not be chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Like, he was handpicked by Trump as
correct.
a guy who would do what Trump wants, or would, follow the orders that maybe another general would push back on. So I mean, it works on both ends, right? There's the threat of being moved out, but there's also a screening process going in.
And that's the insidiousness of this kind of real corruption of the process, right? Kane was advanced sooner than he should have been. He's aware of that, and the people under him are aware of that. So, some of the most interesting reporting, I think, right now, and I've tried to do some of this, other people have done it really well, is the real dissension within the ranks, within kind of the lower levels of the US military forces, feeling, why are we waging this? We're getting associated with something while many troops hate Iran, we're getting associated with something where we don't know what the outcome is going to be, and we're going to get blamed for it. And then the other factor I just say on who's calling the shots is truly Trump's wandering mind. And I had a source tell me a couple of weeks ago, the best hope for kind of letting Iran settle into a low level conflict, lower cost, is if Trump just gets distracted beautifying DC, right? So you saw him gold plate the lions facing the Lincoln Memorial in 24 karat gold. These are the sorts of projects that people really hope that he'll focus on. And as Maggie Haberman just told the Times today, about 70% of the president's brain seems focused on those design decisions. So perhaps the war will improve if it becomes more like 90%.
So one question that I have is that obviously there's this politicking and probably very central to any Trump administration goings on, but has there been any discussion whatsoever about the status of American hegemony? What does this war say about the United States' geopolitical position, particularly vis-a-vis Taiwan? What does this suggest about drone warfare and American bases? Because obviously this disastrous war raises all these questions about geostrategy. So I'm curious if there's any talk about this, or is there, everyone's just talking about politics?
I think to an extent that I've heard talk about Taiwan, I've heard talk about running down US forces that are needed for some kind of future confrontation with China. Um, all of that is also stymied by the fact that there's a real frustration between the Elbridge Colby kind of branch that is a little more abandoned in that sense, and then your more traditionalist group, right? And then don't forget congressional Republicans. Anything they want to do is also affected by the reality that they're asking for a $1.5 trillion Pentagon budget and an Iran war supplemental. So they want to be building up the tools of American hegemony. Now, are they understanding that the perception of American hegemony has gone down? I don't think that's sort of woken up to them. Yeah, I mean, you see that with even their attempt to kind of pull FIFA into the Jared Kushner broader business universe, right? The sense that the world has moved away from America and is turned off by heavy American intervention hasn't yet made it through to the White House. I think it's coming through maybe in some of these calls with Gulf leaders that Trump is now referenced, saying the Saudis, the Emiratis don't want us to be doing this war, but he still expects all those leaders to fall in line. And there's a sense that somehow they will do that. What I don't know, and to your point too, Daniel, think about their other goals, right? So they also want to do, for instance, this Greenland military reinforcement, and they really felt they were making progress there. I heard from senior officials, we're talking to Denmark, it's not going to be a diplomatic crisis, we're getting what we want. All of your other focus falls away, right? If this huge military quagmire is pulling in all your resources and attention all the time.
Has anybody been able to divine any logic to these like cycles that Trump goes through where we're giving diplomacy a chance and everything's great and we're having great talks, and then in the span of a day or two, it's these damn Iranians won't talk about anything, I'm going to bomb them to the Stone Age again, and it happens over and over again, and it's gotten to the point, I mean, it's past the point at this point where people, you see people online like trying to time this to the when the market's going to open on Monday, and like every Friday is we're going to bomb Iran, and then every month or every Sunday night is okay, I'm going to back off, because there's no other way to make sense of the rhythm here. Is it just Trump and his brain, as you said, kind of wandering, or is there something else going on?
There's still a real, in some corners, I wouldn't say overwhelming, but in some corners of the senior staff, there's still a waiting for Delcy instinct. They really think that they're going to get someone emerging from the kind of shattered Iranian regime who's going to work with them and be, as Delcy Rodriguez has been in Venezuela, a sort of proxy in a way. That's extremely unlikely with the Iranian regime relative to
Yeah,
Delcy
you
Rodriguez,
think
right?
it's extremely
Um,
unlikely at this point. God,
and it gets
okay.
less and less likely the more that the Iranian sort of, it feels almost trite to say the Iranian hardliners, because at this point, it's very hard to conceive of anyone inside Iran, after again the latest allegations of war crimes, who wants to deal with the Americans, right? And who wants to be seen as the America friendly candidate. So you had Ghalibaf, this former Speaker of the Parliament, who was seen as that candidate for a while. No one wants to step out and be associated with this war at this point.
This
But that's
this
not where we are.
most Well, so specifically then on this most recent, um, round of yes, we will, no, we won't
Mm.
strikes, and to your piece on Trump's meeting with Netanyahu, um, before on the day of Lindsey Graham's funeral. I don't know what the timing exactly was, but did Netanyahu talk him into something again? Like, is that what happened? I know your piece, you quoted former deputy head of Israel's National Security Council saying this was a meeting Trump preferred not to have, but was ultimately pressured into. Like, what? Pressured into by the prime minister of Israel? What are you talking about? And so, I mean,
Mm.
is there any feeling that maybe Netanyahu like got pigeonholed him and talked him into something, and then you get the phone calls from the panicked Gulf Arab states, and especially MBS, saying like, we would really prefer that our power grids not be destroyed in the blowback, so could you not do this? Like, is that sort of what happened here?
Netanyahu is a factor. I think people are overstating some of the Trump personal distaste for him, much as they did with Biden, right? And that's often either wishful thinking or convenient leaks from a White House that, understands it doesn't benefit them to be seen as so associated with Netanyahu. The actual kind of mind meld between these two men of a similar age, of a similar degree of hawkishness. Trump has always been much more hawkish on Iran than his movement or his advisors. I think people miss that. Personally, again, so much of his thinking goes back to the 80s, to the 70s. He's someone who was very marked by the sense of Qatar being weak with the Iranians. He he feels he is fighting the Ayatollah, right? So for Netanyahu, that's an easy
Right. He,
instinct
I
to
mean,
play
he
into.
said this, right? He discovered Karg Island before anybody else. He was the first one who said we should, this was in the 80s, like we should invade Karg Island. Like, yeah, okay, sure.
Right.
You do.
Right. So, between like phone calls to the press pretending to be someone else and party hopping, he was also discovering islands in the
Yeah,
Strait of
he's
Hormuz.
the Ferdinand Magellan of the Persian Gulf. He's like, discovering new
but
islands everywhere.
but Netanyahu, look, Netanyahu, he has been simpatico to the idea that Netanyahu can give him the way out. And again, where no one else is giving him an easy way out at this point, it can be appealing to hear for the president, oh, if you just bomb this one mountain where all the nuclear material is, they'll come and capitulate, right? If you do this, they'll come and do. If you bomb their critical infrastructure, you just haven't tried this. It also links back to an important part of the Trump psychology, which I hear again and again from people who are briefing him in meetings with him. People compare him to Obama and the sense he wants to seem tougher than Obama. He wants to seem tougher than everyone, right? So the most appealing and the scariest thing from the point of view of escalation, given what he still hasn't done, the most appealing thing to a Trump psyche is sometimes you can do this insane, dangerous maneuver that no other president has wanted to do. Maybe you should try it. And what I know from my sources is that he's considered some of the most drastic possible measures against Iran, right, from the very start of this. So does that mean that Netanyahu is necessarily leading him towards that? Maybe not, but there's a bent there already. And he's aware that Netanyahu is kind of his only ally in this effort now. I mean, the other states, Kuwait, Jordan, states that have kind of quietly helped the US strike Iran, are really feeling the toll of that. They don't want to be doing that anymore. They know they can't afford it. And they know they'll outlast Trump, right? So they have to think about their future strategic maneuvers.
Yeah, I mean, there's I don't even know what to say about it at this point. Like it's just such a bizarre dynamic. Um, when you talk to people in the administration about whatever diplomacy is actually happening, Trump gives this this one read, which is the Iranians are begging for peace. They're begging us to stop. We've hit them so hard. They're constantly begging, coming to him and begging for, please let it end. The Iranians, I mean, yeah, he was mad today. I mean, he did another Truth Social post today because he said, the Iranians have asked us, and they're really close to a deal, and they've asked us, please, 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 don't hurt us anymore, President Trump. And the Iranians came back and said, there's no negotiations with the US. We're talking to Oman. We're not talking to the US. This is all made up. And now Trump is mad at them for, I guess, puncturing the bubble. Is there any clear eyed assessment of where the diplomacy actually stands within other parts of the administration of the White House? Or is everybody just sort of got to go along with Trump's, I think, delusional sense of where things are at?
Part of it really hinges on who the mediator is at any given time, right? And you see this differ from Oman to Qatar to Pakistan. Qatar, I would say, is the closest and the most able to give the Trump people a clear eyed picture of what's happening. Because don't forget, I mean, not only are they a longtime US ally with a big US base, there's a personal business connection there with the Trump family and with Witkoff. So there's a sort of simpatico view there. Right now, with these Omani negotiations, which are they don't have that level of trust with the administration. I don't know how much is being shared necessarily going back to the administration. And then the Omanis are also looking at their kind of possible strategic benefit. As I said, people in these other countries are figuring out a post Trump universe. The thing that President Trump has surrendered for good, probably, is free passage through the Strait of Hormuz. So if you're
Mhm.
Oman or any other country, you're thinking, how do I make money off this? Why would you
Right,
necessarily
or
loot
at
the
least
US?
how do I make sure that I don't get screwed here if this is the new normal going forward, right?
And it's your
And
neighbor, Iran, that's going
in
to affect that.
Oman's case too, I mean, I don't know if this is also part of the picture, but like I think back to when there was initially news that the Iranians wanted to talk to Oman, or that there were initial contacts between Iran and Oman. And Trump basically said, well, if Oman doesn't deal with Iran, we're going to have to bomb the hell out of them. And like, that's Oman. This is not an enemy. This is not a country that you've had an adversarial relationship with. And just out of the blue, like, you had Scott Bessent saying we're going to sanction them. You had Trump saying we might bomb them. Like, that's got to change your calculus too a little bit if you're the Omanis, right?
Well, certainly, and also you as Yomanis really value your role as a mediator in the region. You don't want to be seen as tied to a war-making entity, and that's where, relative to a Qatar, which has that financial heft, so they can a little bit sort of take extreme maneuvers, buy everyone back a little bit. Oman can't do that, right? Pakistan certainly can't do that, which is why you've seen them go very quiet. I think they were giving a very rosy picture to Trump, in part to kind of promote his sense with their own president. This is all part of the broader picture of any normal diplomacy being just out the window now, right? So if your diplomacy is being driven by a little bit of madman theory around Trump, a little bit of personal enrichment and corruption, and then various splintered sense of U.S. alliance because there's not a clear understanding of who the U.S. is even loyal to. Not that the State Department was perfect prior to January 20th, 2025. American diplomats oversaw huge failure and huge just violations of human rights internationally, but to a degree they had a method, right? And that allowed them to sort of stay on particular paths. Right now, it's just as you say, it's Groundhog Day, and it's chaotic.
So so I think the big question is, of course, what comes next?
Yeah.
Right? Is this going to be, which has like always been an option, just kind of goes on, and not forever, because I think things will have to change with a Democratic administration, maybe even Democratic Congress. But like, what do you think the likelihood of a genuine escalation on the level of troops is? Um, because that's really where I see the only real escalation going. Is this a likelihood? Trump, you mentioned already, Trump has been talking about it, but as someone who's like sort of in the administration mind, what do you think here?
I think there's a real awareness it's not feasible. It's really, really, really hard. And that's set in. So if we think about this as a moment of shifts away from US hegemony, the moment of the US a little bit looking in the mirror is happening. And you're hearing that with interceptors, but you're also hearing it with protection of any troops, right? There's not a sense that there can be, for instance, going into Afghanistan and creating control within 2 weeks. That awareness has set in. Uh, do I think that President Trump would like a dramatic show of force and is angry, frustrated, and possibly leaning in that direction? Yes. That's my sincere worry, right? Not for any strategic gain or because he thinks it would end the war, but because this status quo is not good for him either, and his mood is just extremely negative. People will talk about, oh well, he doesn't want Republicans to be hurt in the midterms. I have never heard that as a concern for the president. Perhaps for people around him, yes, even up to Susie Wiles, perhaps, yes, but for Trump, no, that's not a factor. So markets are perhaps a factor, but what we've seen from the markets is rather than in I don't know if we would call it sane, but certainly they tried to moderate someone like say Liz Truss, right? The markets drew them back in and said, no, no, don't go into your kind of crazy agenda. Trump has been able to make the markets sing his song. They're singing from his quiet book, and I don't think he feels the power differential has shifted yet there.
I also think it's, I mean, I think it's different to talk about a Liz Truss who is beholden to the markets, and somebody like Trump or the people who are around him who see opportunities at every turn, right? Like with every Truth Social post, something's going to shift in the market. I mean, he wants to sell early access to his post and to other government posts on that website because he knows this is insider trading effectively. Like this is, jump on it before he says something, and then the market shifts in a certain way, and then he's going to shift back, and when this is going to happen, and you just, go in. I mean, that's total speculation. You don't need to answer that, but like, I think it's a difference between somebody like him and somebody like a Liz Truss. Um, so let's let's talk about in terms of what could be coming next if there is a show of force. I mean, the thing that he's come back to again and again at this point is infrastructure.
Mm,
I don't think he wants to put troops on the ground because that is big casualties, big risk, big danger. And the one thing he doesn't want is for people to yell at him on his favorite TV shows or in the newspaper and say he's a bad person who got, did something stupid and got a lot of people killed. So I think he's averse to that.
mm,
But he's not averse to blowing up power plants. He's not averse to blowing up bridges. He's not averse to any water treatment plants because the blowback for that will fall on the Gulf Arab states. And I'm curious, especially when even the Gulf Arab states are not all entirely. Apparently, the UAE was encouraging him to go for it,
mm.
which is suicidal. But whatever. I mean, those guys are have their own demons to deal with. Um, when at some point does he get to the point where the phone call from MBS at the last minute just kind of falls on deaf ears and he says, you know what, this isn't going to be my problem, it's going to be your problem, so whatever.
Let's also mention the other group on whom the brunt will fall, right? Just regular Iranians. I mean, that just I do want to kind
Well,
of draw on that.
I mean, those
Yeah.
are, yeah, that's completely out of his thinking, I would
But I mean,
assume. Yeah.
but it's really worth mentioning given how much they inaugurated this campaign saying we're coming for you. You know, freedom is
Mm,
here. Reza Shah Pahlavi is
yeah.
coming. You know, you're going to have this moment, and it's just even
Has
in a
anybody
world of
heard from Reza Pahlavi in
yeah.
like the last 3 months? That's amazing. Yeah. Sorry.
Right. No, but you know, even in a world sort of era of extreme cynicism, the cynicism of that is just unbelievable, right? And so if you think about how many Iranians are at really serious risk for Trump, I again, that's not a matter I ever hear strikingly brought up from officials and across a range of agencies, including some agencies, right? So think about agencies. If you think about Pentagon intelligence, their focus is just get the job done, maybe a little bit of human concern. But if you are the State Department, if you are the NSC, if you're, some of those other branches, you're meant to be thinking, how is the US going to have a relationship with the society of 90 million people who could be extremely angry with you going forward? I've
Right.
never heard that thinking. Gulf Arab sort of civilian casualties, not, as you say, not a concern really. Um, but I do think that the best hope for Arabs, and this is what I've kind of noticed in talking to sources in those governments, is stringing Trump along to Danny's point of getting this into a Democratic Congress or next president, stringing Trump along with, maybe the Iranians are going to give you this. Maybe the Iranians are actually going to soften on this. Don't worry, we're talking to them. And you've seen, for instance, even the Emiratis, who, while they've encouraged some of Trump's militaristic tendencies, have ramped up their quiet talks with the Iranians to a degree
Right.
never
Like
seen before this war.
paying them off, basically. Yeah.
So
Um,
that's a factor. I think the kind of promise of keep it at a lower scale and maybe you'll get this payday down the line.
I yeah, I mean, I guess I would ask, like, I mean, is there anybody that you talk to who actually believed any of the garbage about liberating the Iranian people, or
Mhm,
still even is concerned about the Iranian people? Like, there was so much ink spilled about this, and supposedly the closing argument that Netanyahu used with Trump was just bomb the supreme leader and everything will fold and
mhm.
it'll all be fine. Did anybody in this government actually believe that? And if so, are they like, have they come to the realization that this was never about that, or where's the thinking on that front?
I think they is a huge group here. I think people who were sympathetic to that idea continued even until the end of June to believe the US could reach some kind of new settlement with the Iranians and Trump could be perceived as somehow ushering in a new era, right? So that he would be the person to address sanctions. And if you remember, they had an oil sanctions waiver. I mean, they really did try to take a dramatic step very briefly with Iran. that belief was there. I do actually think that that belief is there in some members of Kushner and Witkoff's negotiation team. I mean, Kushner remains deeply convinced that he personally can deliver regional peace. He, believed that he could do that in Israel Palestine, arguably leading to the conditions that led to the attacks of October 7th and what followed in Gaza. Uh, and he hasn't lost that sense. So yeah, there's a sort of blind optimism, I would still say. You see it too in the fact that they continue to, even today, trot out Ukraine peace plans, right? So the sense that we as the Trump administration have some deal making ability no one else ever will have, and just watch us do deals all over the place. That hubris hasn't gone away. It's not driven by human concern for Iranian liberation or rights, um, but the sense that there's a strategic way in other administrations were just too foolish and too weak. Right? This is also a case of like drinking your own Kool-Aid about your opponents. Right? Other administrations were too weak, they were too woke, they were too DEI, and so they couldn't cut a deal with Iran. We're tough guys. We can deal with the Iranians, they're tough guys too.
So I'm curious about the Republican national security sort of professionals who are in this
Mhm,
world. I imagine they see something differently. So I'm going to ask two questions, and they're
mhm,
both related to China. One, have people been talking about like the Middle East as a sphere of American influence in this new world that we're entering? And I ask because in the national security strategy, they only talk about two key geographies to American hegemony: the Western Hemisphere and the Middle East. Um, and they say, the document by committee says different things, different places. But like the beginning, which is I think really what it says, those are the key. So I'm curious if they have any thoughts about like, is the idea that they just want to remain dominant in this region forever? And
mhm.
then two, you mentioned Colby. Like, does Colby think that this is going to be an interregnum, and then who the next Republican president in 2032 or 2036? My guess is that they're all accepting that it's not going to be a Republican in 2028. Um, how do they view that vis-a-vis China, and how does it relate to that whole situation?
I want to quickly jump on your guess about the 2028 thing.
Yes,
They
sorry.
don't think they don't think that they're done. Genuinely, and I know I can it's stunning to sort of think about, but some of the people in these positions are very much preparing for a Vance or Rubio presidency. Probably more
Really?
France. Yeah, I mean
That's a lot to
it's
believe, right? I mean, like, Hitler didn't admit once the United States entered the war that it was over, but their Americans are doing peace post-war plans in 1943. They're like,
so
it's gonna be over. Yeah, but yeah.
right. So it's I don't know. I mean, so it's interesting. I mean, they are definitely thinking about what's next. This is a case where I actually think the traditional foreign policy establishment and the folks on the inside are a little bit, while they are opposed to each other on various other things, in some cases they feed into each other's myopia, right? And this is an instance where, and it's not inaccurate to say China has not arisen in the Middle East to deal with this crisis in the way that some Arab states hoped it might.
No, and
Now,
it won't, because they
right,
don't they real what is it? They're gonna switch to alternative energy. That's their whole thing. This is a
right,
useless region for them, and that's one would think American geostrategic planners might be. I just want to make clear,
right,
as people listening know, I'm not at all comparing Trump to Hitler or the Trump administration to Nazis. I'm just saying there are other moments in history when it appeared lost to other people and not the people who were in power. Apologies.
mm. I bet this question of the Middle East as a strategic competition area. I mean, they don't see Russia as a strategic competitor. It's really only China. Um, well, they varies on that, but so but to that point, they've been able to say, well, China hasn't stepped in. These countries aren't rushing to be with China, so it's fine. What we do here is fine. And again, we're working with the Egyptians, we're working with the Pakistanis, we're working with the Turks. We're going to build a brave new future for the region. And I think that the way that you've seen, for instance, the Saudi nuclear deal be trotted out in this period reflects that sense, right? That sense that we've still won the competition, they still need us, they still want us. So while there's conversations about, for instance, moving basing, it's moving basing to Israel. It's not letting go of the region by any means. But getting back to a place where the Americans can, for instance, guarantee freedom of navigation, I haven't heard planners be able to figure that out. Um,
Doesn't Trump become an obstacle to this at some point? Because you rolled out the Saudi nuclear deal, and then a day later he said, "Oh, by the way, it's not in the document, but the Saudis have to normalize relations with Israel." Like, I mean, maybe sunk the whole thing. We don't know yet. Like, at some point, doesn't that become an obstacle to any kind of coherent vision for a world, or America's role in the world, when you have a president who is just unhinged, basically?
a president who you literally cannot predict what's going to happen. Yeah, it's really impossible. I think you see, for instance, when you saw Trump sitting with Hegseth and Rubio at the most recent appearance where he's talking about the ICC, right? And he lets slip, by the way, Rubio is just pursuing the ICC to shield Bibi, right? I mean, these admissions and these statements that say, no, we don't have any plan. It's just about us and our friends. It does make things very hard for Rubio, but Michael Needham too, who's a guy I'm very interested in. His top advisor right now, the Deputy National Security Advisor, they're not able to plan things like the Saudi nuclear deal, and I don't think it's going to pass Congress. I mean, they don't have the ability to either win over
Certainly
any
not without
Democrats,
normalization. It's not going to pass Congress. Yeah,
which is also not in the offing. I mean, the Saudis
right.
are not recognizing what's happening. But you see the kind of sputtering. It's a really interesting moment to analyze an empire because you see the attempt to move towards normalization, right? There's a sputtering renewal of Hamas decommissioning, Israel withdrawing from Gaza. Maybe this will all happen and Palestinian statehood is in the offing. But then any of that implementation depends on Trump being the person to pressure Netanyahu. Will he do that for you? No, it
So,
will never.
maybe this is a good way to wrap up, and it gets back to the Trump Netanyahu relationship, moving away from Iran, moving
Yeah.
toward Gaza and the the broader region, the that we're talking about here. um you there are moments when you get so tantalizingly close to thinking like Trump is, untethered to orthodoxy enough that if he gets really angry at Netanyahu, or gets really angry at the Israelis for something, he will come down on them, and you might actually see a surprising change in policy. It never happens, but even this week we've had the Board of Peace very gently going, Nikolai Mladenov very gently going to Netanyahu and saying, "Could you please stop, killing 24 people a day, even after we announced this like brand new commitment to disarming Hamas, and you've ramped up the bombing. Like, could you please not do that because it wrecks our credibility?" And you don't know what the response from Netanyahu is, but there is like a tension there that is, I think, more obvious than it's been in the past. Like under Biden, it was always this kind of cartoon thing. Like, yeah, oh yeah, he called him the F word in a private meeting, 3 weeks ago. It's really bad. But like, how did that ever manifest? But you can really feel it and almost see it happening now, like the pulling apart. And I don't know if Trump has anything to do with that, or his unpredictability. He's frustrated. I'm not sure, but do you see any possibility with 2 years left that we're going to have like, and I mean, I guess, prefacing that with the idea that we don't know what the Israeli government's going to look like in a few months after the election.
Mm.
But could there be something that falls out in this relationship?
It really depends on the players involved. Right now, the people who are on the US side, the interlocutors with the Board of Peace, remain Ari Lightstone, a close advisor of Kushner's, and then sort of really strongly pro Israel figures. So if you're thinking about any concession from the Israelis on the occupied West Bank or on Gaza, where, for instance, Rafah, I mean, the airstrikes are one thing. There's just so many logistical elements of this that Trump had promised. At Rafah, you were meant to be allowing at this point fairly free passage of Palestinians and of aid, and instead you have almost 15,000 critically ill Palestinians who are not allowed through Rafah. Right, so that build up and that backlog is very, very strong, and senior American officials on the ground know about it. And I know this because I know people who are in meetings with them saying, if you want to show Netanyahu who's boss, or if you're genuinely frustrated, do this smaller move, right? Don't even do something bigger. Talk about Palestinian detainees. Talk about people who are about to starve to death in Israeli prisons. Even that hasn't happened. So I think that while yes, there is that potential for some kind of Trump backlash at Netanyahu, the fact that it's not imbued with any vision of Palestinian humanity, basically, right, makes it a lot easier for the Israeli hard right to stick to, maybe if more quietly, the line that they're remaining on. If there's a different Israeli government that can maybe nudge the idea that the US will remain committed to Israel and we're going to pull back a little bit from the occupied West Bank because we don't want settler violence, for instance, something Israelis have been willing to talk about, I could see that. But I think the moment of tension you're talking about, we've come so close, closer than we have in Biden. We saw Trump deliver 2 ceasefires. Biden never delivered a single ceasefire. He delivered a brief interregnum so everyone could rearm and fight more.
Right, that they were scared to call a ceasefire because they might get yelled
It
at.
wasn't allowed.
Yeah,
It
right.
was verboten, right? But in Trump, in the Trump era, yes, that inching towards is there. Um, Maybe Miriam Adelson is an interesting figure to look at here too, because there are so many ways to be a hardline Zionist and a hardline supporter of Israel and not like Netanyahu. Miriam Adelson hasn't supported him now for years. So if you look at those trend lines, I don't see a path towards peace from a Trump sort of viewpoint, unfortunately.
No, I'm skeptical too. It just was something that occurred to me. I think what's going to happen is Netanyahu's not going to be prime minister after the next election, and you're going to have the entire American political establishment say, "Hallelujah, the bad guy's gone, everything's perfect and back to normal in the U.S.-Israel relationship," and then we're going to have to start fighting the battle all over again with the next guy. But that's my own rant. Akbar, thank you so much for doing this. We always appreciate having you on and getting your insights into what's going on here, even when it is uh, like indecipherable or like just outwardly seems like a house of madness. We appreciate you trying to make sense of it for us.
Thank you both. One day I'll come with like amazing news, balloons,
Yeah, like
games.
it's perfectly fine. They're all very smart and capable people running a very competent government. Yeah, that's the story we're waiting for.
I look forward to it.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Akbar.